Welcome everyone to today's webinar with Steven Anderson regarding using the rules, Robert's rules. And now I'll turn it over to Steve Anderson. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Christy, and welcome to everybody. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. Today we're going to talk about using the rules. I am a professional registered parliamentarian, so the National Association of Parliamentarians has trained me to within an inch of my life, and they now say that I am an expert in using Robert's rules. But the fact is that every time I go to a meeting, every time I open the book, I see something that I haven't seen before, or learn something that I really didn't think of just that way before. So it's a work in progress. The rules, the actual book is about 700 pages long, which is far longer than it needs to be for everyday use. If you legislate for a living, yes, you can use all of the arcane little quirks that the rules contain. But for most people, the rules can be summarized in Robert's Rules of Order in brief. It's about 200 pages, and it's 90% of what ordinary folks need. Now, I put this up here because Robert's Rules of Order is actually in its 11th edition. It's been continuously in print since 1870s, with the advent of small boards and electronic meetings. And if you take the easy way out, which too many people do, and try to find something online, the latest edition of Roberts that's in the public domain is the 1915 edition because of copyright. So it's grossly out of date, and if you really want to be taken seriously as a parliamentarian, you should refer to the latest edition. And the National Association accepts the rules in brief as being the equivalent to the latest edition. So I'm sure as librarians you have access to all kinds of parliamentary guides, and there are literally dozens of them. Anybody can do their own interpretation of the rules, but there's only one original, and that's where I'm going to take my subject matter for today. The objectives, by the time we're done, you'll know the basics, why we have rules, what they generally cover, and once you've seen this much, you'll know where to look when a question comes up for the right rule. Most groups start very small with routine operations, and you can just, it's usually a small group of people who know each other well, and so they can talk through any issues that come up. The group gets larger, above 12 or 15. Sometimes there will be disagreements, and once the disagreements get too loud, it's too late to try to put the brakes on. So it's very beneficial to have some structure, some agreed rules when things are going well, so that when things go badly, you have some way to keep people in their lane. Most people will tell you that bad meetings are either really boring and aimless, or they're entirely too dramatic. And Roberts will help you avoid, or at least work through, some of those situations. The goal of Robert's Rules is to balance organizational efficiency with free participation by the membership. You join an organization to get things done that you can't get done by yourself. But that means that the organization's goals, as determined by the majority, have to take precedence over pleasing everyone. Okay, first, bylaws, or the Constitution. The bylaws are laws adopted by an organization for its own governance. They are the highest level that an organization can determine for itself. They are the contract between the organization and the members. Your bylaws articulate the rights and duties of membership, and they provide how the organization is structured and governed to provide the membership with what it promises. The bylaws are in effect every day of the year for as long as the organization exists, whether you're in a meeting or not. The bylaws can be amended, but never suspended. And you would be amazed the number of people who sign on to organizations and never read their bylaws. You would never join. You would never hire someone or agree to do some work without reading your contract. And yet people just don't take that seriously when it comes to organizations, voluntary organizations in particular. The bylaws are always in effect. Robert's rules of order are only in effect during meetings. Robert does not require fairness. That's a common misconception. Robert assures fairness by providing a structure of accepted rules and procedures, accepted by the majority of the members. But it is an honor system. Enforcement requires the vigilance of the individual. When someone sees something going wrong, he or she must speak up and convince the majority that the rules, the agreed procedures, say something other than what's happening now. But the majority is the ultimate authority. What's a meeting? A meeting is an announced gathering to decide on actions to be taken in the name of the organization. Announced meaning your meetings will either be scheduled in the bylaws the first Tuesday of every month, or there will be a notice sent to the contact address of every member announcing that the December meeting will be held on the 5th at the usual place. Chance gatherings of say the 2/3 of the board of directors, even if you all happen to be at the same watering hole on the same Friday night, that is not a meeting. Participation at meetings is restricted to members. You may have rules that say non-members cannot attend board meetings. That is to say, people who are not members of the board can't attend a meeting of the board. But on the other hand, if you don't have that kind of restriction written into the bylaws, then members are free to observe, not participate, just observe. A quorum is the minimum number of members required to properly conduct business. It's usually, for small boards or committees, it's usually a majority. A majority of the active members must be present, or that body cannot make a proper decision. You can share information, but you can't commit to any decision. Now, most organizations start small, like I said, and when you only have 10 people in the organization, they probably live fairly close together, and getting 6 of them, that's a majority, more than half, getting 6 people together might be no problem. But when your organization begins to grow and attract people from farther away, getting 60 out of 100 or 51 out of 100 becomes, well, impossible sometimes in the year. So the first thing every organization should do is decide what is a truly representative number and put it in the bylaws. A lot of organizations will go with a percentage, 10%. If you can get 10 people out of 100, if that's the decision of the assembly, then 10 people can make decisions for the organization. And there are a lot of nights in the winter around here where 10 people would be, well, that would be an accomplishment. And you can imagine, you can be pretty sure that if those people are serious enough to drive through the snow to get to the meeting, they probably can be trusted. But don't assume that. Minimum officers for a meeting are the chairperson and a secretary. Now, the chair is the person assigned to moderate the meeting, not to dictate to the meeting. It can be the president, it could be the vice president if the president's not there, and it could be a temporary chair if neither of the top 2 officers is present. Follow the order of business and keep order, which means the chairperson has to be focused on the process, not the content. If the chair is going to get involved in every question that comes up, he or she is going to lose perspective, probably say a lot more than they should be saying, and probably lose track of what's going on, which is why it's critical that the chair remain impartial. The flip side of that is an impartial chair is more credible when difficult decisions have to be made. If you've already shown your biases, then people are going to expect certain things or demand certain things instead of just accepting that you were put there because you can be trusted to make decisions. And the secretary will keep the minutes. And the minutes are to record what was done, not everything that was said. As you all know, a lot more is said than gets done at any meeting. You can't expect the secretary to record perfectly everything that was said. The function of the minutes is the official record of the organization. So what was done has to go into the minutes. Roberts provides a standard of order of business, which is the 4 categories into which all the minutiae of your meeting can be pigeonholed. You start with the reading and approval of the minutes. Of course, that little asterisk there is a reminder that before any of this can start, the chair has to make sure that there's at least a quorum in the room. So the chair and secretary need to know how many members you have, how many must be there, and count heads before you even call the meeting to order. Following that, you have the reports of officers and committees, unfinished business if there is any, and then everybody's favorite, new business. This is not the same as the agenda. The agenda for a typical meeting might have a dozen different ideas that are supposed to be covered, but they should be categorized according to the standard order so that people have a reasonable idea what's coming up next. The agenda in some bigger organizations, and especially at meetings like convention, the agenda has to be approved by the body before you start, and nothing can be added to it except by permission of the body. But in smaller organizations, if there isn't a formal vote taken on the agenda is just most likely the president's laundry list of the things she wants to get through tonight. Nothing is set in stone, and members are free to bring up, especially in new business, anything that might have occurred to them even on the drive to the meeting. I always provide my new chairs with a script, because one of the reasons that many people hesitate to chair meetings using Robert's rules is that they think the language sounds like it comes from, say, the middle of the 19th century, which of course it does. But the advantage to using special language instead of just speaking in the vernacular is that everyone will recognize that something special is happening. It isn't just the chair making an offhand suggestion about something. Now, this is, we're going to do something important, so pay attention, because you're going to be asked to participate. There were a couple of questions that a member sent in dealing with the agenda. To what extent does it matter if we don't keep to the publicly announced agenda? Well, every organization is free to customize their agenda, even if you do follow the standard order of business. For example, if you have guests who are there for special purposes, like to make you invite the sheriff to come to your meeting to talk about the changes in school zones for the coming year. Okay, you don't make the sheriff sit around for the whole meeting, so he becomes a special report that can follow after the officers and committees, for example. But it's important for people to know that if they want to hear those special reports, they should come at a certain point, at least plan to stay for the first half, rather than coming in late and missing something because they thought it would be there. And then the second question, topics of discussion jump around and should technically be addressed during another part of the agenda. Where do those items appear in the minutes? Well, if you allow topics to jump around, then it's always possible that decisions will be made that need to be recorded in the minutes. And if you allow those decisions to be made out of order, you have to record them when they happen. That's why in most cases, Robert recommends that committees, let's say the Finance Committee chair stands up to report on the budget for the coming year. If the Finance Committee has a motion that comes out of their discussion about the budget, then it can be addressed right there. Or the Finance Committee can make a report and the budget approval can be listed for new business. But once you decide that, well, it should be a decision and not just a haphazard occasion that changes from meeting to meeting. Put topics, subjects, decisions where you think they will best be addressed by the body and keep them there. So back to the script I was talking about. This is the boilerplate, if you will, from Robert's Rules to start a meeting. The first item of business is approval of the minutes from the meeting of September 29th or from the previous meeting. Now, if your minutes are relatively brief, then you can have the secretary read them. If your minutes are a little longer, then it's a good idea to publish them, put them on the website, whatever, put them in the newsletter, so that everybody has a chance to read them before they get to the meeting. And the chair will then ask, are there any corrections to the minutes as published? You look around the room. If anybody has a change to the published minutes, they move to make that correction right then. If there are no changes, then the chair, seeing this, will say, hearing none, one last chance to speak up, the minutes are approved. And this is called general consent. You only vote if it's necessary. Everyone expects certain items to be routine, and it's awkward when the chair has to ask, can I have a motion to approve the minutes? Now, if everybody in the room, including the chair, knows that the minutes are fine just as they are, then the chair may assume the motion and offer one more chance before approving the minutes. Now, this is because the organization must have minutes. You cannot continue if you don't have an official record of all the decisions that the organization made. So the members can't vote no on the minutes. They can only perfect the minutes and then approve them. The chair will then go on. The next item is the report of the Finance Committee. The chair should introduce officers and committee chairs for their reports, but not turn the meeting over to the finance chair. No, the chairperson is always in charge, and the finance chair will give his or her report and then probably conclude with, are there any questions? And members are allowed to ask factual questions, but this is not the place to debate something that the committee put in their report. Now, if the chair ends by saying, and so, on behalf of the Finance Committee, I move the approval of the 2020 budget. At that point, the chair steps back over to supervise the vote on that motion. Motions from committees, because they already come from more than one person, don't need a second. And so the chair just restates the motion and then finishes, as always, is there any discussion? Now, rules for debate. For those of you who didn't know that debate had rules, first, speech has limits. Robert still says, from 1876, 2 speeches each on every motion. Each speech not more than 10 minutes. Now, this dates from a time when, well, people seemed to be a lot more long-winded. And it was a long buggy ride to the meeting, and they had a long time to think about what they were going to say. So you had to allow 10 minutes. But these days, we're used to saying everything we need to say with a half dozen emojis or 280 characters. And so Robert now recommends that each organization have a special rule limiting speeches to what they think is suitable. So most, when my organizations ask, I say 2 speeches of 3 minutes each ought to be enough. Most of the time, just like baseball pitchers are supposed to be able to deliver a pitch in 38 seconds, but everybody knows that they take longer. Well, most people can say everything they need to say in under 2 minutes. Every so often, though, you'll get somebody who comes prepared to read a long manifesto, and at that point, the chair needs to have something he can use to say, the member has reached his 3 minutes, please wrap up. When you're talking, stick to the point. That means the pending motion. Most people can remember when the motion is a simple one to talk about the motion. But when you get to, say, amendment of a motion, too many people will go back to talking about the main motion and not talk about the amendment. And so the chair needs to be ready to remind them. You always debate proposals, not personalities. You may like the person who made the motion. That doesn't mean that you're going to like the proposal. So find a tactful way to say you don't like your friend's proposal. And similarly, you may not like the person who made the motion, but it may, in this case, be a good idea. So train yourself to talk about whether the proposal has merit or not. And in case there's any doubt, it's always a good idea when you go to the mic to say, I'm in favor of this proposal because, or I oppose this motion because. It helps keep you focused, and everybody else knows whose side you're on. Finally, if limiting debate becomes necessary, you have a lot of people in the room, they seem to all have a lot to say, but they start to repeat themselves, too many Me Too's, the chair can always remind people to make room at the mic for somebody who hasn't spoken yet, or somebody who has something new to add, and if necessary, the members can always move to limit debate, such as, I move that we continue this debate for not more than 15 more minutes and then take a vote. Now, because that sort of motion limits the freedom of speech, it requires a 2/3 vote. But usually, when one or two people in the audience are starting to think this is going on too long, a lot of people in the audience are thinking the same thing. Now, Robert has a concept that he calls settledness, which basically means the group can only be made to make one decision one time. Once you make a decision, once you change a word in a motion, once you've disposed of something, you can't be made to go back and go over the same ground again that meeting. Now, the next meeting is an entirely different thing. You can come back to things that were set at one meeting, but one question, one time for each meeting. So we're going back to the motion made by the Finance Committee, which is the standard way to handle any motion, whether it comes from a committee, an officer, or a new business. The chair started all this by asking, is there any discussion? And when it begins to peter out, the chair may say one last time, is there any further discussion? And when nobody goes to the mic or raises their hand, the chair will then say, hearing none. The question is on the adoption of the motion to approve the 2020 budget. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. Now, let me back up to the question is on the adoption of the motion. The chair should restate the motion at least twice. Once to start discussion and once to close discussion. And anytime there's any doubt in between, the chair should remind people that the discussion is on the adoption of the motion, etc. You need to work to keep people focused, and it prevents confusion later on. You don't want people in the back to say, "Wait a minute, what are we voting on?" That's a sign that they weren't paying attention and nobody else was helping them out. So you usually, especially in smaller meetings, you can usually use voice vote. However, the chair must always ask for the negative, no matter how one-sided the vote may sound, because there may be 2 or 3 people out there who are entitled to vote no. And you never ask for abstentions. People who abstain have decided not to express a preference. So you don't want to highlight them by forcing them to admit that they didn't want to express a preference. For a voice vote, you just announce the result. The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. If you need to, if the room is too big, and it's hard to tell, did the ayes really have a majority, or were they just yelling really loud? If you're ever in doubt, ask for a show of hands or a counted vote. The chair can always ask for a more visible sign of support than just the voice vote. And a member can ask for a show of hands if he doubts the result. But you never want to leave people wondering, did that really pass or did that really fail? Make certain, because like I said, once a question is decided, you can't revisit it for that meeting. So make sure that the decision is credible. And the chair should always state which side has the motion, either adopted or lost. And if the motion is adopted, state the effect of the adopted motion. People may be wondering, okay, what happens if we approve this budget? Okay, the ayes have it. The motion is adopted. The 2020 budget is adopted, and the treasurer will be directed to begin paying bills based on the budgeted amount. or the treasurer will be directed to issue a check for whatever was in the budget, so forth. Let people know what they just did before you move on. If there's unfinished business is not just old business topics that keep coming up. There isn't really a decision to be made. It's just something that your meeting always seems to talk about. If it's not a decision, it's not business. Now, the odds are that the unfinished business is going to be known only to the chair or the secretary, because truly unfinished business is something that was business last meeting and either wasn't finished when the meeting had to adjourn, or the meeting couldn't make a decision other than to postpone the business to this meeting. So they will know, the chair will know if there's unfinished business to put on the agenda. If there isn't any, then there isn't any unfinished business and you don't even ask for it. But if it is there, the chair will say the same standard line. The first item of unfinished business is the motion to approve the 2020 budget that was postponed to this meeting. Is there any discussion? And so forth. Now, everybody's favorite, is there any new business? And a member can stand at this point and say, Mr. President, and the president will say, the chair recognizes Member Baker, and Member Baker will say, I move that the association donate $500 to the Ronald McDonald House. And the chair will say, it is moved to donate $500 to the Ronald McDonald House. And if somebody hasn't already yelled out second, the chair will ask, is there a second? The second just means that somebody else in the group thinks it's worth talking about. So then the chair can restate the motion. Once the chair states the motion, it belongs to the assembly. Up to that point, the maker can say, oh, I forgot to say which Ronald McDonald House. The Ronald McDonald House in Watertown. And the chair, if she's awake, if she's thinking about it, will say, is there any objection to the member amending his motion? And nobody should have any objection. But once it gets to the point of it is moved and seconded that the association donate $500, the body owns the motion. And there's no such thing as a friendly amendment, just as there's no such thing as a hostile amendment. There are just amendments. Once it gets to after the chair's restatement, every amendment has to be processed the same way. And amending is part of discussion. Questions?
Yes, we have one. Is it important to record in minutes who seconds motion?
No. You need to have the maker's name. Obviously, if there isn't a second, the chair should look around and say, there is no second. The motion dies. Is there any other new business? But as far as the minutes go, you just say that, the motion was made to donate $500 to Ronald McDonald House by B. Baker. No need to get the name of the second. And I said amending is part of discussion. There are limits to what you can do to an amendment. With an amendment, you can insert words, you can strike words, you can add a whole sentence, you can strike a whole sentence, but you can only change one spot in the main motion at a time. Now, the exception would be if it's a really long motion and the maker, say, abbreviated Ronald McDonald House of Watertown to RMHW, and you think it's more important, more appropriate to write out Ronald McDonald House of Watertown all 5 times that it appears in the motion. All right, you can propose to make that change. You make the first one. The other 4 are what we would call conforming amendments, meaning once you approve the first change, you might, you can approve the rest. Or you could just say that you spell it out the first time and use the abbreviation. But the key is only one change at a time. So it is moved and seconded to amend the main motion by, let's say, striking 500 and inserting 750. If the amendment is adopted, the main motion, or let's say the main motion would then read, the association shall donate $750 to the Ronald McDonald House of Watertown. The motion to amend is debatable and amendable. Is there any discussion? Now, debatable means you can talk about it, and amendable means that it is possible to amend an amendment, but you can only amend once. So you can have a main motion, an amendment to the main motion, and one amendment to the amendment. You can't have a third degree amendment. So people will still try, and the chair should. Sometimes it even makes sense to do it that way, but the chair should rule out of order any tertiary amendments. You dispose of the first one and then make the second change. Once again, settledness. Once you change, let's say you approve this amendment, you change the 500 to 750. You cannot then go back and change it back to 500, and you can't change it to 1,000. The body has decided that they want it 750, and for the rest of this meeting anyway, that's what it's going to be. And you'll recognize the standard script here provides a little bit of guidance and keeps everybody on track. Discussion continues on the amendment for a while, and then hearing none. Question is on the motion to amend the main motion by striking 500, inserting 750. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The amendment carries, and the main motion now reads, donate $750. You still have to go back and approve the main motion as amended. Yes, a number of people in the room, a majority of people in the room agreed on 750 as the amount, but those same people may not all agree that now is the time to make such a donation. Now, settledness. Does that mean a group can't change its mind? Well, of course not. If a motion is voted down, it can be renewed at any subsequent meeting as if it was never heard before, without prejudice. Because it may take a while, particularly if it's a new idea, it may take a while for the maker and her friends to convince enough people that it really is a good idea. And persistence sometimes pays off. You make the same motion every month, get more people to talk about it, get more people to think about it, and you might be able to get it passed sometime. Or you adopt something and you realize that it's not such a good idea. Okay, now Robert was of the opinion that there is nothing worse in an ordinary organization than instability. You want to be able to count on the organization moving forward rather than making a decision one month and then the group that shows up the following month is slightly different, and so they rescind the decision, and then you go back and move it again, and then maybe rescind it again. I mean, we all have friends like that. So Robert came up with a kind of an interesting idea. It only takes a majority to adopt a new idea, but it takes 2/3 to rescind that adopted policy or to change it significantly once it's been previously adopted. Now, why? Okay, new ideas, by their very nature, are untried. And the group will only have the maker's word and maybe some facts, but basically they have to take the maker's word that it's the right thing for this organization to do. And so it's tough enough to convince a majority to do something new. If you can get that, then it's probably worth a try. But a bad idea or something that's not suitable for the organization will probably make itself obvious over time. So after 3 months or 6 months or whatever, there will probably be more people in the room who've actually experienced this bad idea. And so if it's really bad, you shouldn't have too much trouble getting 2/3 of the people in the room to vote to either change it significantly or rescind it altogether. New ideas, you got to give the benefit of the doubt, so a lower voting threshold. Bad ideas that you've already tested, well, they ask to be changed or dropped, and you can get 2/3 to do that. Now, most of the decisions that your organization will make will be fairly simple and straightforward. The main motion, probably approved right away. Maybe you'll need an amendment or two to clear up some wording, but most of the time, particularly in small to medium-sized groups, there's enough agreement of the basic principle that you won't need to work on motions too much. But that is not always the case. A lot of times, a motion comes to the fore because a one member or maybe two have a problem. Maybe it's a personal problem as far as they're concerned, but it might be something that the organization can do something about. As much as it bothers them, and as hard as it is for them to speak rationally about it, we have to find a way, if possible, to get from their problem to something that the organization can do. Well, Robert provides a path to sort through all of the distractions and the ambiguities and get from something that one person may have recognized is not working right to something that the organization can do. And we all join organizations because as a group we can accomplish more than we could individually. So the organization often has a real obligation to at least consider the possibility that if they're not at fault, at least there's an opportunity for them to do something for their members. But this has to start with a main motion. The member has to talk not about his problem, but about a suggested solution. And this is a tremendous shortcut in efficiency for the organization that observes Robert's rules. Most of the time, people have to talk out loud, think out loud for a long time before they get their feeling about the problem to a solution for the problem. Well, Robert makes it necessary, requires that before you go to the mic, you have a suggested solution. And this has the effect of reducing the problem from a big migraine to a small toothache. It's still the reference point for the main motion, but the main motion and its discussion is about, is this a good thing for the organization to do? Like I said, most of the time, if the maker has thought about it and maybe consulted with a few people, the basic proposal will be a solid solution. It'll have all the main parts, who's going to do it, what are we going to do, how much is it going to cost, how long is it going to take, how are we going to know if it's working. If you got all that, then you probably can persuade a great many people right away. Now, maybe it'll need an amendment, but what happens now is that the scope of the discussion is getting narrower. A main motion can be anything that anybody can think of. The amendment has to be germane to the main motion. It has to be properly stated and placed, and it requires a separate vote, which means you have to focus on the solution even more strongly, even more tightly than you did when it was just the main motion. But what happens if you can't perfect the main motion enough to get a majority? The group is too scattered, or the solution is too complicated. There are enough people in the room, and the chair will see it happening. There's indecision. There's an unwillingness to let things go forward. Okay, the next motion in the order of precedence is the motion to refer to committee. If the group can't make a decision, can't come to an agreement on a solution, then the first thing to do is send it to a committee to get more information. Let them chase down all the facts and figures, talk about it themselves, and come back next month or in 2 months with a recommendation, hopefully making it a little clearer for the people who have to make the decision. But Robert doesn't want this indecision to lead to random discussion. So the rule is that once you have narrowed the discussion further by climbing the ladder and going from the main motion to the motion to amend to the motion to refer, now you can't go back down the ladder until you dispose of the highest ranking motion, which at this point is the motion to refer. So if you leave it, when you send the motion to committee, send the question to committee with the instructions, that forecloses any further discussion of the motion by the body. It's over for the meeting for that day. Until the committee comes back, the body itself cannot touch that question. Once they do come back, then perhaps the recommendation is to accept the amendment, or perhaps the recommendation is not to accept the amendment and make some other change to the main motion, but you have to back down the ladder the way you went up. And let's say that you can't even agree on an amendment, and you go straight to the motion to refer, like I said, the motion to refer, if it's adopted, closes off discussion of that question for that meeting. So you can't even go back and say, well, I think if we amended it this way, it would take care of it. No, the body decided, send it to committee. And committee is where it's going to stay until the scheduled report. And you don't talk about that officially, put that main motion back on the floor until you get that committee report. All right, let's say that the motion to refer isn't what the body wants to do. They reject it. The next narrower motion is the motion to postpone it. The people in the room don't want to send it to a committee. They just want more time to think about it, to go out and do their own research, and then come back at a following meeting and address the question again. If once you get to postpone, until you reject it, because if you vote to postpone, then the question is postponed and it's done for this meeting. If you reject postpone, well, then you can come back down to a motion to refer, or if there is no motion to refer, you go back to trying to perfect it yourself with amendments. But if you get to postpone, it's gone for this meeting, and it will come back as unfinished business at the next meeting. Now, let's say that you can't get a majority who wants to postpone, but you think if you talk another 30 minutes, you might get there. Okay. Again, you're tightening down on the limits of the discussion by the earlier motion that I mentioned, moving to limit debate to 30 more minutes, or limit debate to 1 minute each for 10 more speeches. And then we're going to vote. It forces people, well, ideally, it forces people to think about the decision they're about to make. And of course, if this has gone on too long, someone can call the question. The motion for the previous question, unfortunately, is one of the really grossly misused motions. People get in the habit of just yelling out question from the back of the room. And the conventional wisdom is everything has to stop just because some member has heard enough and thinks we should vote. No, the motion for the previous question requires a second. It requires a 2/3 vote because it cuts off all debate and amendment. And if you get the 2/3, then you start backing down the ladder. Any pending motions that still remain are immediately voted on until you get all the way back down to, obviously, if you get down to postpone and this time it gets a majority, well, then the motion is postponed for a month or until the next meeting, and all voting on this question stops. If you get down to, if the postpone fails, but you get down to refer, and this time it gets a majority, same thing. You don't talk about this until the committee comes back with a recommendation. The whole point is to take what could be an aimless, limitless discussion of 50 people with 50 different ideas and force it to focus down to something that will get a majority decision. Or, well, it's still a majority decision even if it's a rejection. Like I said, very seldom will you get a main motion with an amendment and a motion to refer and a motion to postpone. But sometime, with the right combination of people in the room and the right combination of possibilities surrounding the main motion, you'll get support from a lot of different directions, but no majority. And you have to give people the opportunity to voice their opinions. But again, the whole point is to make a decision that the organization can put into action. And somehow you've got to get there. One of the problems that many of my new chairs mention is that, again, the language is a little bit daunting because they don't get to practice it much. Back when Robert wrote his little 17-page manual, the only way to have meetings was in person. And so everyone got a lot of practice at the routine, the process, the words, when to participate, when not to participate. And now your average organization, in my experience, does entirely too much business by email or phone, text, etc., which has the advantage of speeding communication. Well, no, it has the advantage of enhancing information exchange, but it tends to complicate the communication to the point where things get lost. And your average president may only preside, well, some of them only once a year, many of them only once a quarter, and you don't really get comfortable with the language, which is why the next few pages of the script often get a lot of work. Most everybody can remember how to approve the minutes and move through the committee reports and call for new business. But then you get into the rarer items like refer to committee, and it is helpful to be able to read that it is moved and seconded to refer the pending motion to the stick with the Finance Committee for review and report. Adopting this motion removes the pending motion from consideration until the committee returns its report. The motion is debatable, like you can talk about whether it's a good idea to refer, and amendable. You might decide that it should go to the Bylaws Committee instead of the Finance Committee, etc. You should always be specific: what committee, what instructions, when to report back. And under Robert, sending a motion to committee is the only way to delay it for more than one meeting cycle. You can only postpone to the next meeting, but you could refer to committee and give them 6 months to report back. And why can you only postpone till the next meeting? Because every meeting is its own authority. The meeting that you happen to be at in November cannot tie the hands of the December meeting. They have just as much authority as you do. So postponing only goes to the next meeting. Now, postpone is what most of us would say when we wanted to delay something 3 or 4 weeks. But people have gotten the idea that postpone doesn't apply in Roberts. You have to say table something. Well, no. Postpone is what you want, especially if you know that it's going to be, say, lengthy, at least till the next meeting, and you know it will be handled at the next meeting. It's a definite time. Table is the second most misused word after question. Table is to set something aside temporarily in favor of something more urgent. You have a meeting, you ask the sheriff to show up and tell you about the new school zones, but he's running late, so you continue your business, and then he shows up, and you don't want to make him wait while you finish all of your business. He's busy after all, so you can just table the pending motion to allow for our guest speaker. He will talk for 20 or 30 minutes, and then you can take the motion from the table and pick up the discussion exactly where it was. But unless you have an urgent interruption, you don't want to table something. You want to postpone it so that it goes on the record as being unfinished business to be brought up on time at the next meeting. And so the motion to postpone is pretty much the same. The standard verbiage adopting this motion forecloses consideration of the pending motion for this meeting. This motion is debatable but not amendable, because you can't postpone any farther than the next meeting. And then is there any discussion, etc. And every motion, whether it's a main motion or a subsidiary motion, every motion has to have a vote, its own vote. And here's the motion to the previous question: to end debate. Motion requires 2/3 in favor to immediately stop amendment and debate on the pending motion. This motion itself is not debatable or amendable. Why not? Because the point of previous question is to make a decision right now. So you don't want to just talk some more about whether you want to decide to make a decision. Shouting question without being first recognized by the chair is not only improper, it's rude. It is fair to go to the mic and debate and then end your speech by saying, I move the previous question. And if you get the 2/3, then you can shut off everybody who was waiting in line behind you. But that's the way it works. You have to get the 2/3. If 2/3 of the people in the room think they've heard enough, they probably have. Okay, you're not supposed to interrupt when somebody else has the floor. But if you have a factual question, it's allowed for you to stand at your place and say, Madam Chair, I have a question, or request for information. This was formerly called point of information, but by misunderstanding, that gradually evolved to where people would stand up, interrupt a speaker, and start offering information. And that's just not done. That's called debating. You wait your turn to debate. But if you have a factual question to ask the chair, you can request that without being recognized first. Now, this is not a rhetorical question. Doesn't the speaker know that he's not making any sense? That's not a factual question. No hypothetical question. How would we get rid of the treasurer if we thought it was a good idea? No, factual questions. Now, that's not to say that you can't use a factual question to either support the person who is speaking or put a hole in their argument. Madam Chair, does the speaker have the actual figures on homelessness in the downtown area? When you know that he should know that it's not really a problem, but he's not going to say so. So you can be clever about it, but it needs to be a factual question. If you have a parliamentary question, you can ask that of the chair, who may consult with the parliamentarian before answering. Madam Chair, is it in order at this time to move to refer the pending motion to the Finance Committee? Because you may think that'd be the good thing, the right thing to do. But if you're not sure, ask the chair. And finally, point of order. When you think the chair has made a procedural error. Madam Chairman, point of order. The speaker has now spoken 3 times, and I believe that is one more than he's allowed. And the chair should say, your point is well taken, and the chair apologizes for missing the count. Or the chair will say, the point is not well taken. The last time the speaker came to the mic, it was to make a parliamentary inquiry, and that does not count against him. You shouldn't be afraid to raise a point of order if you think the chair is breaking the rules. Sometimes they just don't know, or they got busy. And sometimes they are doing it deliberately, and if you don't call them on it, perhaps no one will. When the last item of business has come up and nobody goes to the mic, the chair can ask one more time, is there any other new business? Hearing none, the meeting is adjourned. You don't need to ask for a motion to adjourn. The body has the option to extend the meeting by bringing up business. If they don't want to keep talking, then they want to adjourn, and you should let them. Hearing none, the meeting is adjourned.